We are picking up on the last line on Yud Ches Amud Beis. So the Mishnah talked about which items you were able to, which kind of ink you're not able to write with, and also what kind of parchment you need to be able to write on. So the last line on Yud Ches Amud Beis says, Chaysa Ksuva B'Sam, Sam Sama, it's this Sama, whatever that is. Sikra, Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana, Sikra Shema, that is called Sikra. Kumas Koma, Kumas is like, it's a type of sap that they get from the tree. We're turning to Yud Tes Amud Aleph in Megillah. We're Masechtas with Megillah. Okay. Kankatom Charta de Shufchi. This Kankatom is it's like a black ink that the shoemakers used to use. Diftera de Miliach Ukmiach below Afitz. Diftera was they used to make parchment in those days. They used to make it and they would finish it with some sort of gallnuts, and if it had everything but the gallnuts that were applied at the end, that's also no good. And Niyar Mechaka. Niyar is this papyrus that they would write on. So anyway, so if you write on any of those things, it's not good. Acha takes Ashuris, and the Mishnah finishes by saying it has to be written in Ashuris, which is Ashuris script. The Chsiv Kiksavim Chizmanim that says it has to be written according to their time, which again is saying similar as they're written, which means that just like they had written it was supposed to be done in Ashuris, that's now also we're supposed to do in Ashuris, and it has to be done I'll say for Ubidio, that has to be done with parchment and with black ink. Minalan, how do we know that it has to be written? Where do we learn that it's parchment and black ink? As Ksiva. Ksiva makes a Gzera Shava from Ksiva and Ksiva. Ksiv Hachav Atichtov Esther Hamalka. It says here in the Megillah that Esther wrote the Megillah. Uksiv Hasim, it says here when it's talking about by Yirmiyah, by Yarmalahem Baruch Mipiv Yikra Elai Eskal Advar Me'ela Vani Kosev Ala Sefer But Yo. He says I'm going to write it in a sefer with this black ink, so that's how we learn. We make a hackish between the words Ksiva and Ksiva that tells us that you have to write it in black ink and on parchment. Okay. Next Mishnah. So before we start the Mishnah, just a little quick review about what we did in the first parak. So we said that, remember, there's three possible times. You could have three different people that would lay in on different times. You could have a person that lives in a village that would lay in on the Yom HaKnisa, which means that they would go back to the previous Monday or Thursday, depending on how things fall out, so that they wouldn't have to come back into the city, so they could read as early as the 11th. And then you have people that live in a walled city, which would read, live in Yerushalayim, they would read on the 15th. And then there's the rest of us, we all read on the 14th. And again, for the examples, we use Bnei Brak as the example of walled city and unwalled city. So let's say you have the people again, so unwalled cities read on the 14th, you have the walled cities read on the 15th, and you have, again, the villagers that would read as early as Yom HaKnisa, which could be as early as the 11th. So, the Mishnah is going to talk about now what happens if one of these people finds himself in the other locale when Purim is starting. What is he supposed to do? So, Ben Yisha Halach L'Krach. Let's say you have someone that was living in a town that went to a walled city. So again, for this example, let's say someone from Bnei Brak went to Yerushalayim. Uven Krach Shahalach Li'ir, or vice versa. You have someone that was from Yerushalayim that went to Bnei Brak. So if he's going to go back to where he lives, which the Gemara is going to define when he has to go back, so Karimim Komos, then he just reads in his place. So even if, let's say, he was someone who lived in Yerushalayim and he went to Bnei Brak, so even though in Bnei Brak they are celebrating Purim and they're reading the Megillah now, he does not have to read with them, and he can wait until he goes back to Yerushalayim and he would read on the 15th. But if he's going to be there and he's not going to be returning back to where he lives, Kariman, then he would read with them again in this situation. He would read with them on the 14th. And the Mishnah concludes, which we had this a blot or two ago, that where is it that you have to start reading the Megillah in order to be out to your chiyuv of how far you have to of Kriyas Megillah? Remeir Omer Kula, you have to read the entire Megillah, which is what we do from Vahiv Me'ach Hashverosh all the way to the end. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Yehudi start from the Yehudi who talks about Mordechai, and Rabbi Yossi Omer Me'achar Advar Me'ela, that after these things, when it says that Achashverosh was Gidel as Haman, and the Gemara is going to explain, it's going to learn from the same pasuk why they each have these different starting points for where you're going to where you have to read the Megillah. So the Gemara says, "Amar Rava lo shana l'sha'asu lachsu b'leili dad." That when we said that someone who lives in the city who's going to the unwalled town, he's going to Bnei Brak. So he said that he doesn't do it. That's only talking about that he's going to go back the night of the 14th. But but if he's still going to be there until morning, so then Kariman, then he has to read with them, because the main Megillah reading that we do is during the day. Well, we do it at night. We also do it at night, but the main Megillah reading is during the day. So if the person is not returning at night back to where he lives, and he's still going to be there come morning, then he has to read with them that night. He would have to read with them, and he would have to read with them the next morning. And then the Mefarshim just discussed whether or not he would actually have to then read again. Again, let's say you're talking about someone that was in Bnei Brak and went to Yerushalayim, and he was in Yerushalayim. So someone from Bnei Brak someone from Yerushalayim went to Bnei Brak. So, and Bnei Brak, they're celebrating at night, like we're doing, again, let's say, it's not a good example this year. So let's say they get it first, let's say Wednesday night, and he's still there through Thursday morning, he would read with them. The Mefarshim discussed whether he heads back then to Yerushalayim, would he have to read again that night and the next day, which we're not going to get into. So again, if he's going to be there still by morning, he's going to read. Then he has to read with them. Amar Rava, minahani. Where do I know that we say that a person, if he's still there through the morning, that he's going to read with them? It says in the Megillah, it says that therefore the people, the Jews that were living in the unwalled places, who were living in unwalled towns. Now the Gemara says, Michti. It said in the pasuk that they were Jews that were living in unwalled towns. So what does it say? So why does that say that they were living in the unwalled cities? We just said they were unwalled residents that were there. So why do we have to repeat it again? The Gemara says, that even if the person's there just for one day, if he's in an unwalled city, it's possible that he's going to be called an unwalled citier, and he would have to read with them on the 14th and not on the 15th. So the Gemara says, Ashkan Paras, so good. So that's good. We learn out from the Pasuk that for an unwalled city person, that if he's there, he can be called a Ben Paras. How do we know that someone who was in a walled city, how do we know that he can be considered that also? So the Gemara says, Ashkan Paras, Mukha from how do we know that someone who's living in a walled city, the same thing that if someone was there just for one day, that he can be considered a resident of a walled city? My answer is Spero, who it's just a Svara. Paras ben Yama, Kari Paras, Mukha ben Yama, Kari Pamukha. Just like we said that someone in an unwalled city can be called an unwalled resident for a day, so too someone who lived in a walled city can be called a walled city resident for a day. Okay, the Gemara continues now. So now we're going to talk again about the villagers who we said could go back to the Yom HaKnitza. So for example, let's say Purim falls out on a Tuesday, right? So we said the people in the villages would be able to read on Monday because we don't want them to have to come back into either because it's a reward that they give the food out all year long, so we give them a reward that they do that, so therefore that we don't make them schlep back into town, or it's because we say that we want them to be able to provide food now for the people, so if they know they have to come on Tuesday, they wouldn't come on Monday, so therefore we say they can lay in as early as Monday. So Gemara says now, Amar Rava, Ben Kfar Shahalach Lir, if you have a villager that went to the city and he was there on the night of the 14th, Ben Kach uven Kach Kari Imahin. So either way, whether he's going to be staying there that night or if he's going to be leaving before the morning, either way he has to read with them he has to read on the 14th. My time, and what's the reason? Because because really the people that live in the village should really be reading on the 14th just like the rest of us. Like there's no reason not to. It's just that Rabbanan hu deiklu al kfarim kadesh yisafku ma'im umazon lachem shevekrachen. It's just that the Rabbanan gave them like a special dispensation to say we don't want them to have to schlep back again, or because as the Gemara says that it's a reward for them, so we don't want them to have to come back, so we say let them read a day earlier so they don't have to come back on Tuesday. But that's only talking about if the villagers were going to be in their village and they wouldn't be coming into the city. But here, but let's say the guy's already in the city, right? So the villagers who are not schlepping into the city, they have this special thing they could read early. But if the guy was in the city anyway, let's say he wanted to spend time with family that was in the city, so he came in and he was going to be there on the 14th, so he would have to read on the 14th. He doesn't have this get out of, or be able to read it early heter that the other ones do. So Abai asked a question that said that they would read again on the 14th. It says, Ben krach shahalach le'ir, ben kach uven kach, if you had someone that lived in the city that went to an unwalled town, so again, let's say you're talking about someone from Yerushalayim that went to Bnei Brak, so either way, he's going to read Karibim Komo, he has to read in the place that he is. So Gemara asks, then Krach Sakodaitach, you're talking about someone that lived in the city? We just said before in the Gemara, Bim Asid Lachsar Talia Milsa. The whole thing is dependent whether or not he's going to return in the morning back to where he came from. So Elallah ben Kfar, so must be talking about someone that's from the village. And we say that even though that he has to read in the village, and it does not repeat the Megillah on the 14th, so that contradicts what we just said before, that he has to read with them on the 14th. Here we're saying that he doesn't have to. Gemara says, well, wait a second. Tani Kariman. You had to change the case. If we were talking about if it was a villager or if it was a city dweller, so too, he says, once you're changing the first part, change the second part also, about whether or not he has to read with them. So you can't bring any raya from that, because he's saying, since you had to change the wording of that brisa, so change it to the way that I was saying it also, and it's going to be fine. Okay. The next part of the Mishnah said, from where is the person supposed to read the Megillah? So Tanya, Reb Shimon, Yerchai Yomer, Mibalaylahu, that you're supposed to read from the Lailahu when Nadadash Nas HaMelech, when Achashverosh. This is a fourth shita now of when you would read. You start reading from the point where Achashverosh he woke up in the middle of the night and then he had to call the people to find out what happened. So, Rabbi Yochanan, V'kulam Mikra Echad, they all learn from the same pasuk that we're going to say now. They all learn from the same pasuk why you would start in different places. But it says, Vatichtov Esther Hamalka Mordechai Yehudi Es Kol Tokev, that Esther and Mordechai wrote all of the power that happened in the Megillah. So Manda Amar Kula, the Manda Amar that says that you have to start from Vayihi B'mei Achashverosh, the very beginning of the Megillah, Talk for Shalach Achashverosh. He says we start discussing when Achashverosh rose to power. So Achashverosh rose to power at the very beginning, where it talks about he ruled over 127 Medinos. So that's why you start reading from there. Umanda Amar Me'ish Yehudi, the one who says you start reading from Ish Yehudi, it says Talk for Shal Mordechai. We're looking at when Mordechai came to power, and it says that Mordechai was a great, that he was elevated, he was a great person. So he says we start talking about the greatness of Mordechai. So you start reading from Ish Yehudi. The one that says you start reading after these things, which Achashverosh then elevated Haman to be one of his trusted advisors. Talk for Shal Haman. He says you talk about about Haman's rise to prominence. Umanda Amar B'Lailahu talk for Shal Nes. The one that says you start doing it from B'Lailahu talks about you start we talk about the power of the Nes, when the actual miracle took place. Even though the miracle took place the whole way along, like it says, the whole thing was hidden, so you don't see anything taking place. But really, like the climax of the story of Purim takes place by Lailahu when Achashverosh wakes up, and that after that, then the series of events that happen very quickly. Haman's overthrown from his power, he's hung, and the Jews are given the right to be able to fight for themselves. Rav Huna Amar Mehachar, Rav Huna says there's another pasuk that we learned some. It says. That's a different pasuk that they learned from where you're supposed to be starting. Uma ro al kacha, uma hagialem. It says that the Megillah is talking about what happened to them and what happened as a result of what they did. So, Manda Amar Kula, the one that says that you read the entire Megillah. Mara Achashverosh. So what did Achashverosh see? Shenismatesh bekalim shabeis hamikdash. That he started using the Beis Hamikdash. Remember, Achashverosh made a cheshbon. Al-Kacha, Mishum Dechashiv Shimshanin, Lo Ivra. Because he said Al-Kacha, because of this, the fact that he had counted out when he thought the 70 years were up, that the Bnei Yisrael were going to be brought back to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, and by his calculation, that didn't happen, so therefore that's when he took out the Kalim from the Beis HaMikdash and he had the big party. And then what happened from that? To Kata Vashti, that because of the result of that party, he killed Vashti. The next Shita, Umanda Amar Ish Yehudi, the one that says you start reading from Ish Yehudi, which is talking about Mordechai. It says, it means Mara Mordechai, the Ikni Bahaman, that what is it that Mordechai saw that caused him that he would not listen to what Haman was doing, that he was like poking the bear? It says, Al Kacha, the Shavi Nafshi Avodah, because Haman made himself into Avodah Zarah and he wanted people to bow down to him. And Mordechai said he's not going to do it. Umahi Gialem, and what happened to them? This Charish Nitza, that a nes occurred, that the whole miracle of Purim took place once Mordechai stood up and he says, I'm not going to bow down to Haman. According to the Mandama that says that it starts when Haman rose to power, that you start reading from there. He translates the pasuk like this: that Mara Haman sheniskane mikol hayudim. That what did Haman see that he got jealous, like he got upset at all the Jews that were there? It says Al Kacha. It says Mishum de Mordechai lo yichum lo yishtachav. Because when he saw that Mordechai was not bowing down, that caused, like we said last week, that he could have everything that was going for him, but when he sees one person not bowing down to him, it meant nothing to him. Umahi gialem. And what does it mean? What happened to them? It means that they hung him and his children and his sons. They were hung on the tree. Umanda Amar Malaylahu, and the last one that says they start reading from Malaylahu. Ma ra Achashverosh lahavia sefer hazichronos. That it means, what did Achashverosh see that he said, go bring out to me the sefer hazichronos and start reading about what happened? And Al Kacha Dizmane Esther lahaman badeh, because he said the reason why is because Esther invited Haman to the feast with him. And remember, we said that Achashverosh thought, what's going on? Why is Esther inviting me, Haman, and myself to this party, maybe they're plotting to overthrow me. And he said to himself, wait a second, if they want to overthrow me, someone would tell me about it. But no one told me about it, so he says, someone must have done something good for me, and I didn't repay them, and that's why no one wants to tell me now anything, because they see that I don't appreciate when someone helps me out. Umay Gia Aleim, this Charishni, so that again, the nace happened now, that the whole story of the Megillah. Amrav Chalba, Amrav Chama Bar Gur Yamarav. Halacha Divrei Ha'amar Kula. The halacha is that you're supposed to read. I know we're hoping that we just have to start reading maybe from Balayla Hu, which would be a lot shorter. But no, the halacha is that we read the entire Megillah starting from Vahibi Me'ach Hashverosh, Ve'afilu Man Da'amar Me'ish Yehudi, and even according to one that says that Yish Yehudi Tzricha should take Ksuba Kula. Everyone agrees that you have to have an entire Megillah written in front of you. The only question is, where in the Megillah do you start reading in order to fulfill your obligation to read the Megillah? But they all agree that the Megillah has to be whole. Amrav Chalba, Amrav Chama Bar Gur Yamarav. Megillah Nikra Sefer, that a Megillah is called a Sefer, like a Torah, V'Nikra Sigaris, and it's also called a letter. That it's called the Chaim Sigaris HaPurim. So what does that mean? Nikra Sefer, it's called a Sefer like a Torah, Shim Tfara V'Chutei Pishtam Psula, that if it's written, if it's sewn together, remember we said you're supposed to sew it with the sinews, right? Yes, you're supposed to sew it with sinews. So if you sew it with thread, then that makes a Sefer Torah possible. The same thing with the Megillah. If it's sewn together with this thread, it's going to be possible. But it's also called a letter. That a Sefer Torah has to be stitched the whole way down, but the Megillah could be stitched. You could have 3 stitches in it. And the 3 stitches have to be like you have to have 3 stitches on top, 3 in the middle, and 3 on the bottom, so it keeps it all together. If someone was writing a Megillah that was written, one Megillah between all the Megillahs, in those days, unlike now where we have a Megillah that's written in the big Tanakh book that they bring out when you get the Haftorah, they used to have and some shul still have this, that you have the scrolls that were written just like a Sefer Torah. The Megillahs were all written in one scroll. So he says that if someone reads the Megillah, let's say the Megillah was written in one of these big scrolls that had all the Megillahs listed in them. It had all 5 of the Megillahs were written together. So if you did that, lo yatzid, you're not going to fulfill your chiyuv to lay in the Megillah. Because it has to be a separate Megillah standalone. That's only talking about if Megillah Esther is the same size as the rest of the parchment going along. So then it's not evident that you're reading Megillah Esther because you want to do Persumei Nisa. It just seems like you're reading it because you want to learn from it. But if let's say you have the section of it was either going to be bigger or smaller, then that would be good enough. You would be able to learn from that even if it was all together with the other Megillahs. We will stop here.